I ultimately left my aunt bankrupt and her son in prison for homicide. And it all began with a piece of paper she refused to give us at my grandmother's funeral. This chapter of my life finally closed about an hour ago. When I walked out of the notary's office. It all started 3 years ago. At the funeral for my babushka Anna. She passed away at 73. Leaving behind a significant amount of real estate and a family that was about to be torn apart. As the paperwork tsunami that follows any death began, something felt wrong. My aunt, Svetlana, was being strangely evasive about the death certificate, which my mother, Elena, and I needed to start the inheritance process. The whole situation became so confusing that I had to step in and handle all the legal matters for my mom. That's when I made the first sickening discovery. The apartment my grandmother had lived in for decades was no longer hers. It had been signed over to Svetlana's children. A deeper dive showed that most of babushka Anna's assets had been transferred to my aunt long before her death. I went straight to my mother, Elena, who told me that on the dates these papers were supposedly signed, my grandmother was already in terrible shape. Dementia and Alzheimer's had taken their toll. She was in no condition to legally sign anything. Even then, I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. I went to see Svetlana, hoping for an honest explanation. I'll never forget her response. The coldness in her eyes. The slight, dismissive curl of her lip. She told me it was none of my business. She said she intended to get everything she possibly could. And as for the remaining real estate that was meant to be shared property, she would force us out of it one way or another. Svetlana said those words with such arrogance, completely unaware that this single, greedy declaration would be the first thread she pulled in the unraveling of her own family and future. I was baffled. My mother had done so much for her sister, helping her build a career in sports, supporting her with money during hard times, and this was how she was being repaid. Elena was devastated. In tears. Unable to comprehend how her own sister could be so cruel. I knew then that we had to go to court. There was just one problem: money. My mother is a working pensioner and is still raising my 13-year-old brother. I had just poured my entire life savings into renovating her apartment. Fortunately, I had a good friend at my company, a lawyer, who offered to help us navigate the legal battle. We gathered the necessary documents, and he advised me to record any and all future interactions with Svetlana's family. We sent a formal letter to my aunt, informing her of our intention to dispute everything in court. And that's when my life became hell. It started with threatening phone calls from her sons, my cousins, Dmitri and Ivan. I recorded every single one. Then they started stalking me, finding out where I lived and worked. It was unsettling. But I had a solution. My boss had previously offered me the use of a company driver who lived nearby, and I decided it was time to take him up on that offer. One morning, my driver was waiting downstairs. I put on my coat, walked out of my apartment complex, and was immediately hit in the face. It was my oldest cousin, Dmitri. He spat another threat at me and then fled. This act of brute force revealed Dmitri's greatest fatal flaw, his belief that violence and intimidation could solve any problem. A trait that would ultimately seal his fate and land him in a prison cell. My driver rushed over, helped me up, and calmly informed me that the entire assault had been perfectly recorded on the car's front dash cam. After a call to my boss, he took me to the hospital. The next day, I handed the police the video footage and all the audio recordings of the threatening calls. When the police contacted Svetlana about her son, she was livid. She called me, screaming threats down the phone. I just calmly reminded her that her son was already in serious trouble for threatening me. She hung up. About a week later, I was woken in the middle of the night by a deafening banging on my apartment door. Before I could even reach it, the door gave way and flew open. Two large, imposing men walked in, holding a set of papers. They told me this was their apartment now. 2. If you want to remain healthy, one of them said, you should pack your shit and go. When the police arrived, they checked the documents and confirmed they were technically legal. My aunt had hired what you might call professional inconveniencers, thugs who specialize in forcing people out of shared properties. In Russia, there's a concept called a right of ownership. After my grandmother's death, some legal manipulation by my aunt had left her with 3/4 of the ownership right to my apartment, while my mother held 1/4. Svetlana had given a tiny fraction of her right to these goons, granting them the legal ability to move in and make my life unbearable. The next 3 months were a sleepless nightmare. I had to constantly pick my own locks because they kept changing them. The apartment was filled with constant loud music, filth, and dirt. But I refused to break. After 3 months of my unrelenting persistence, they gave up and left. Seeing that their plan had failed, my cousins got desperate. The night before our court date, one of them, Ivan, came to my apartment complex and began spraying pepper spray all over my door, trying to lure me outside. He thought this was just another act of petty harassment, a final desperate attempt to intimidate me before court. He had no idea that the toxic cloud seeping under the doors of the apartment complex would turn his stupid prank into a homicide. Luckily for me, I was doing some minor repairs after the goons left and had insulated all my door and window cracks with rags to keep concrete dust from spreading. I barely even smelled it. The next day in court was the final showdown. I had convinced my mother to ask the court to completely eliminate Svetlana from inheriting anything. After I presented the judge with the audio of the threats and the crystal-clear dashcam video of Dmitry assaulting me, it was over. The court ruled entirely in our favor. After court, I went to the police station to report the pepper spray incident. I was immediately rushed into an interrogation room and questioned. As it turned out, my elderly neighbor had died from lung complications caused by the pepper spray. A commenter on my story later put it perfectly, poor guy. He had nothing to do with any of this shit. That senseless loss was the darkest part of this whole affair. And that brings me to today. I just came from the notary, where my mother officially signed all the real estate into her name. I received a significant financial settlement for the assault and threats. My piece of shit aunt, Svetlana, is left with nothing but her own tiny apartment and her son, Dmitry, in prison for assault, threats of violence, and homicide. Her other son, Ivan, was fired from his rescue team job and is now barred from working in any government or social structures, and he has no other skills. They are completely bankrupt. It serves them right. The whole affair was brutal. And as one person commented, it was one of the most violent revenge stories they'd ever read. But in the end, justice was served. This whole ordeal taught me that unchecked greed doesn't just corrupt people. It utterly destroys them and everyone they touch. Sometimes, to get justice, you have to walk through hell to find peace on the other side. So I'll ask you, when family shows their absolute worst side, where do you draw the line between forgiveness and fighting back with everything you have?